Welcome back to the Farm Next podcast. I am your host, Sarah Beth Aubrey. I am the owner and founder of the Elevate Ag Peer Innovation Network for progressive agricultural producers and C-suite agribusiness executives, networking them together in a broad North American-based network that also includes small, private peer groups for members of these to get together, to share their challenges, to have a chance to get peer advisory just from one another, and as a network, take advantage of curated content found nowhere else. I am here today to get back into the podcast series that we have been doing now for into 2 months. This is episode number 6. And if you've been following the episodes, you will know that we started the podcast here just last month in October of 2019. And I kicked it off with a platform kind of position, trying to think where would be a good place to start this discussion, to start this podcast. And I decided that place to start would be with what I am calling the 6 fundamental shifts in agriculture that affect everyone. They affect us differently based on our location, our size, our crop or livestock, whether we're in the agribusiness, supplier, services sector, or we're farming. There's no way that we are not affected by these things. These are shifts that happen no matter what we do about them. And that's why it's so important, though, when we look at these external things, and we're going to get into shift number 4 here in just a moment. But it's so important when we look at these external things, the opportunities or the threats, and these shifts each have both, that we consider these as part of the planning of the future of our organizations. As you know, if you've started following my work through my new book, that is another book. Hold on. We've got my whole stack here, and I was going to go into that second. I love podcasts. We could edit this. But note to team, don't. Let's leave it in. This is part of the fun. So let's go there. My new book, Who's Running Your Farm Next? 5 Steps to Develop and Coach Your Next Generation, is a place where we're talking about that. We're talking about what needs to be done to get the multi-generational approach that we have in agriculture, frankly, a little better organized for the future. How do we transfer the knowledge of the senior generation of leaders, both family members and employees, to people who have a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of perhaps new and modern education, but don't have seasons under their belt to understand how to have context for that? Many of you have done a great job of putting in systems in place for transfer of wealth and risk management, and yet failed to figure out how the people factor into the equation. So that's what I'm here to talk about. And so as I begin this podcast series, here we're at number 4 in the series of topics. I wanted to think about the foundational things that I realize are affecting everybody. And we're going from here on up. So let's get into that today. Number 4 is basically around the topic of consumer preferences, consumer perceptions, and quite frankly, the power that these things have over our businesses. After looking at the global marketplace, which we did back in episode 5, it's obvious that the next sort of topic or transition is really the burgeoning effect that preferences of our customers have on our business. So let's put it in the context, because for me, again, I'm not an economist, I'm not an accountant. I'm a person who brings people together to work on the topics that they need to in order to make behavioral change. So I like to use story, analogy to get you thinking about how does this apply to me? So let's use the story now. Okay, perfect timing. Here we are in the States. We are the week before our Thanksgiving holiday. And as we move into this season that's traditionally full of gatherings for people, you may find yourself at some point, if you haven't already, sitting across that Thanksgiving table from someone who knows absolutely nothing about agriculture, or what they know about agriculture is sort of peppered with inaccurate things. It's late in the semester now for those of you who've sent your kids off to school. Maybe your niece or your daughter has gone to school only to have returned trying to sort out a few things. Perhaps that she does not understand GMOs, that meat maybe should be banned because now we can make it in a petri dish, or is it real that almonds make milk if they don't have an udder? For many of you, that's like a horror story, but for many of you, it's not. It's the reality of the conversations that we're having, not just with these far away consumers, which is kind of a nebulous term, almost like someone who lives so far away that we can't see them, so we don't know them, and we can lump them into things. We can vilify them if we want. We can, scoff if we want. We can put this consumer, persona on make an avatar of a type of person that doesn't understand us, doesn't know what we do, and they sure as heck don't appreciate us. And we can do that. But the interesting thing about today is that these perceptions around agriculture and food and the questioning that goes on with it, the inaccurate information, is happening in our own tables, around our own, dining rooms, at our own holidays. I cannot recall in the last 5 years of speaking and traveling that I haven't had a conversation around people talking about how their family member, or their family member's, boyfriend or girlfriend or date is bringing this discussion to their table. It's not the faraway consumer anymore. Those consumers are coming to our doorstep. But we can be mad about that, and you can call it whatever you want. But what you can't do with this fundamental shift number 4 is call it unimportant. Because of the power of communication today, the impact of changing food preferences and the information around it, good or bad, negative or positive, correct or not correct, is happening faster and faster, reaching more people than ever. So here's the thing. Even if you don't consider yourself in direct-to-consumer sales, I don't do farmers markets, or I don't go direct, to the packer, I'm a grain farmer or whatever. Consumer preferences matter, and they matter to you a lot. Think about your direct customer that you probably understand more today, be it a processor, a miller, a packer. These types of organizations give tremendous weight to the emerging views of food consumers. These are views that are for their customers in North America and around the world. So we have to recognize, again, back to that global impact that we discussed in the last podcast, that spending a fair amount of our time complaining that this pie in the sky consumer, it doesn't know what we do, is not going to help us be in business in 2050. It sure as heck doesn't help us develop and coach the next generation, whose charge is far different than ours today. They will interact with these consumers. They will need to have a successful dialogue, and they will have to do education as part of growing and maintaining the business that you have today and that they're hoping to build. Here's an interesting thought. The other thing about this consumers think this type of very vague mentality and sort of negative attitude is we have to recognize that you and I, we changed food preferences too. In fact, every generation influences what we're going to eat. We have the means. For multiple generations here in North America, and now in all over the world, we have the money to influence the way we like to take in our nutrients, and we think of them as a luxury item or as a pleasurable item. We want choices. Every generation has influenced what they eat. Let me give you a really interesting story that I personally debunked until I talked to a member of that generation. So quite a while ago, I was at the University of Illinois, and I was taking animal science classes, meat science classes, things like that. I can't remember. It's been 20 years since I was in college. I can't remember now which class it was, but it was pretty early in my college days. So maybe like an ANSI 100. But for those of you who are friends listening, some of you will remember this, hearing this, but you might be able to tell me which class we heard this from, because I don't remember. But anyway, we were talking about the species and the markets, and what's the per capita consumption of this or that protein, and that kind of discussion was happening. And it was pretty interesting. I've always been interested in the livestock sector, and I did meats judging very successfully actually in college. So this discussion was going on, and one of the things got brought up around mutton, and in the lamb business, and the professor said, that used to be a very, very large segment of the protein consumption, especially in certain parts of the country. And after World War II, truly it declined sharply. Again, the statistics that I'm sure he gave at the time have long since been lost to history. So people are like, well, what's the deal with that? And he said, literally a generation of men, primarily at that time, came back from World War II and the Korean War eras, and they had eaten so much mutton in their rations for months and at a time that that generation consciously made a choice that impacted that industry for decades. They chose, I don't want to eat any more of that mutton. And I thought, frankly, at the time, I thought that was a pretty broad generalization to be made by a professor. I didn't eat mutton. I admitted it wasn't something that I had ever had. I grew up in central Illinois. My mom or grandmother never cooked it. That didn't mean a lot of other people might not eat it. I didn't really know. We had round steak, and I'm never eating that stuff again as long as I live. Thank you, dear mom. I didn't know. I thought that was like a weird thing to say. Like, okay, this whole generation, they ate so much of it in these rations that were not very savory, as we could probably guess, that they came home and they made this decision to stop eating that, and that impacted the industry. I just thought this was crazy. So I decided to go and speak to a member of that generation that I knew very well. And by the next holiday, and here we are thinking of Thanksgiving again here in the States, I got back to Thanksgiving and I talked to my grandpa, Ray Willard, and Grandpa, I miss you. I asked him this, and I explained the premise that my professors had given me. And I said, that sounds crazy. Is that true? And my grandpa, he just laughed and he kind of, said, oh my gosh, hell yes, Sarah Beth. I would never eat that stuff again as long as I live. My God, the memory flooded back for him. And he began, no, I'd never eat that again. And oh my gosh, when I got home, we had some sheep. I got rid of those damn things. We're in the hog business. And so I'm not here to offend my sheep raising friends. Please, please don't think that. But this is a story that was related to me by a member of that generation who backed up that food perception that someone else had shared that supposedly affected the industry. I thought it was baloney until I spoke with a person of that generation whose apparently feelings were very strong. And that sense of feelings, whether that was a good choice or a bad choice, didn't matter. They changed the consumption of a certain kind of protein. Now, would we sit here ever today and say things about the greatest generation were a bunch of fools who didn't know good meat if they saw it? I doubt it. We give a lot of respect to that generation. We don't tend to do so for generations that have come since. But the fact is, just like my grandpa's generation, evidently influenced that food perception and where the consumption of that went, and thus the production. So too do the generations today. So too do you and I with our food choices. So I guess the point of this discussion today, again, you've got tons of places you could look for facts and figures, but I like to use the point of story to get you thinking, what's needed here? If consumer perceptions can, and you acknowledge that and you agree with me, can change industries, what do we do about it? We may not be able to change the perception if it's already so far gone. We may be able to. But what job is needed is really where I come from. Because remember, my platform to you is, what do we do to get the next generations ready to lead agribusinesses into the future? Do we need an advocacy role all the time that helps debunk myths that are ridiculous, but also provides sound education and discussion? Or are we needing to spend more time strategically evaluating what we raise to take advantage of higher profits based upon the preferences that we see very realistically happening in front of us by those customers that we might want to put in a far, far away place, but they're really not? So these are things that are for you, your next generation, to figure out. But I think it's necessary to start to move ahead of these curves instead of fighting it. Maybe you need a marketing person. Maybe you need a social media manager. Maybe you have an advocacy and community outreach point person. Maybe you'll even outsource with a marketing agency to help you put your own material together. Your next CEO has a lot of opportunity to influence and educate, and that's actually a plus. We have found that younger generations are often more comfortable engaging consumers than more senior generations are today. And they seem to have a more clear sense of responsibility about bridging the gap with non-ag consumers. So that native, and you couple that with the more native understanding of the power of your internet or cellular enabled device in your hand, that member of your operation has access to information and the influence to change the world. That's pretty amazing. And it's also true. So I'll leave you with that there today. And I want to tell you to have good conversations and talk about these things as you look at your next generation and where they need to go. Be sure to join the Farm Next Facebook group where we continue this discussion in a virtual format. Just search for Farm Next in Facebook and you will be able to find it, and we will get you in. You get asked to be invited, but we'll put you in. You can also message me and I can send an invite to you. You can also find us on Instagram. We're doing a little bit of discussion over on Twitter. That's not where I'm most active, but if some of you are over there, reach out to me and connect with me there. Also LinkedIn. So I think that's it for today. And I want to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving here in the States. And I want to share verbally a great deal of gratitude that I have for you in agriculture. I've lived and worked in this industry my entire life, and for multiple generations of my family on both sides, we have made our living from agriculture. It is what I do, it is who I am, and I know that's the same for you. So thank you for listening, and I will see you in episode 7.